Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin. Now, Keir Starmer and the Labour government has reintroduced a university free speech law after, get this, initially scrapping it. The new version is a heavily watered-down version of the original law that I helped create with other academics in the universities who were fed up with cancel culture and woke ideology. In fact, I elaborate on many of those issues in a book next month. But the wider problem here is not just what's going on in our universities, it's what's going on in the battle for free speech in this country. Just think about everything that we've seen since the Labour government came to power. We've seen people being thrown into prison for sharing memes, for sharing offensive views on social media in the privacy of their own homes. We've seen much discussion of this new definition of Islamophobia, which includes references to the rape gangs as an example of Islamophobia, a move that many people see as an attempt to clamp down on any criticism of Islam and cultural practices within Muslim communities. We've seen this new workers' rights charter, which you might have seen in the newspapers yesterday, because it could ban pub banter. If you're caught talking about controversial issues such as transgender ideology or the rape gangs in a pub and a worker decides that that's harassment, they could, in theory, sue that pub or that restaurant for having offended their views. We've also seen people like Yvette Cooper, the Labour Home Secretary, talking about wanting to expand non-crime hate incidents, these rather Orwellian measures that many people think are designed to clamp down on free speech and free expression in our country. We've also seen plans for a trans-inclusive conversion therapy ban. And of course, who could forget the time that a Labour MP stood up in the House of Commons and called in Britain for blasphemy laws, and our Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, didn't even rule it out. Check out this clip for a moment. It's quite striking.
Will the Prime Minister commit to introducing measures to prohibit the desecration of all religious texts and the prophets of the Abrahamic religions?
Well, can I agree with him that desecration is awful and I think should be condemned across the House?
I'm sorry, but do we live in Britain, the home of individual liberty, the home of common law, the home of free expression, or do we live in some sort of authoritarian state? Because over the last few months, we've also seen Keir Starmer and other people within the Labour government decide that millions of people in Britain are far right for discussing issues like the rape gangs. And we've also seen them complain about foreign interference by people like Elon Musk while sending their activists to America to campaign on behalf of Kamala Harris, or as we saw with Keir Starmer's Chief of Staff, Morgan McSweeney's company, the Centre for Countering Digital Hate, which he helped to found, actively talking about killing Elon Musk's Twitter or X platform. So what I'm trying to say here is Labour's war on free speech is both visible, but it's also here to stay. And I think we can see it now in the universities. As always, let me know your views via gbnews.com/yoursay or tweet me at GoodwinMJ. But I'm joined in the studio now by Professor of Politics at the University of Buckingham, Eric Kaufmann, who also looks after the only anti-woke research centre in the UK, which has been offering programmes to people who are interested in studying woke ideology. And Eric's done more than most to campaign to defend free speech in our universities. So, Eric, welcome to the show. Today, lots of people out there will have read about Labour's reintroduction of this free speech law. Labour now will say they're defending free speech in the universities. It's not quite what it seems, though, is it?
No. They introduced this partly because there's a judicial review coming up and also because of pressure in the media and from academics in open letters. But the reality is this is a toothless bill. And it's toothless in four ways. I mean, the first thing is that student unions, who are a chief culprit when it comes to no platforming, are no longer covered. Students can no longer appeal to the OFS, to an ombudsman. Students are now excluded. Third, they've taken away the right to a statutory tort, so universities can ignore rulings by the OFS.
So just on that, so the important part of the original law which was brought in under the Conservative government, was that basically universities that violated free speech, that violated the freedom of academics to research whatever they wanted, those universities could be fined, which would incentivise them to protect free speech. But now what you're saying is Labour has removed that threat of punishment, that threat of financial sanctions. So therefore, if you're a university vice-chancellor or you're, let's say, a woke bureaucrat, do you really care anymore about protecting free speech?
Well, you can't be sued if you ignore the rulings. Now, technically, there is still the right to fine, but here's the most ominous thing, is Bridget Phillipson has just recently, in a piece in the Times Higher, suggested that political appointments were at work in the past, and that's something she's going to look into. The coded message there is that Arif Ahmed, who's the free speech czar, the director of the Academic Freedom Directorate, is more or less going to be on a tight leash. And so what I think that's going to mean is when Arif goes to universities and says, oh, your policies are not compliant with the Act, he's going to be sort of wrapped on the knuckles, a hand will come on the shoulder, and there's no way he's going to be allowed to fine people.
So let's just step out a minute. So what we've got in universities in Britain, which most people won't be aware, well, we've got this creeping cancel culture, we've got this creeping woke ideology, we've got the fact that universities now lean overwhelmingly to the left. I think I'm right in saying that about 85% of academics identify on the left of politics today. You've got lots of students self-censoring, hiding their views, concealing their views because they're scared of speaking up. And now we've got a Labour government that's basically removing all of the venom, if you like, from this new law, which means that the status quo is going to carry on. Is that right?
Essentially, yes. I think we should expect to see a continuation of the cancellations and the no platformings because they've really defanged this bill, because they don't believe in it. I mean, they opposed it tooth and nail in Parliament, in the Lords. They said it was a, forces inside there, or people in government said this was a hate speech charter. You look at the lobbies, the University College Union, which is the main lecturers' union, very radical at the top. You look at Universities UK, they all oppose this bill. And let's face it, if we sort of step back, you just mentioned about a number of crises in free speech in Britain. Social justice is a much higher value than freedom of speech for the left.
So for people on the left, what you're saying is their ideological project is more important to them than defending free speech and free expression, that is what differentiates people on the left from people on the right.
Yeah, and just to translate for the listeners or the viewers here, social justice essentially means protecting one's emotions from harm. So if speech harms a very sensitive individual, that individual's so-called emotional safety has been compromised if they're a member of a so-called historically marginalized group. So protecting members of historically marginalized group from speech they don't want to hear is more important than allowing speech. And
okay, so let me ask a devil's advocate question here for a minute. Lots of people watching the show will say, well, we've talked about censorship on campus, academics being sacked, people being disinvited for decades, right? People watching the show will remember similar debates in the 70s and the 80s. Is it really that bad on university campus today, they will ask. And in fact, Labour MPs, I'm sure, will say in response to this show, well, Matt, show me, the big scandal, show me the hundreds of students being, marched off campus or whatever. I mean, is it really that bad?
It is really that bad, Matt, and I think we have many different ways of measuring it. I mean, one, yes, there are prominent people who get canceled, like Kathleen Stock and Amber Rudd and so on. But for every one of those, we have thousands of academics whose speech is chilled. So 1 in 10 academics say they have either been punished or threatened with punishment for speech. We have members of political minorities, gender-critical feminists, conservatives are far more likely to worry. I'll give you a good example of how much chilled speech is going on. Only 1 in 5 Brexit-supporting academics in the social sciences say they would be willing to express that view to a colleague.
That's me. Well, that's me. I was a Brexit-supporting academic in the social sciences. So only 1 in 5 would be able to share their views.
Would be willing to share their views. And for students, it's 2 in 5. Brexit-supporting students.
But what about if you're a Remainer? If I was a Remain-supporting academic in the social sciences?
It's about 90%.
90% would feel comfortable.
90 versus, what is that, 20? 20 versus 90.
So, okay, just quickly, what happens if we don't fix the universities?
Well, we will continue to have a narrowing of viewpoint diversity. We will not have... The knowledge production system will be systematically skewed and biased. Certain questions won't be asked. Certain views will be barred. I mean, can you actually investigate are puberty blockers effective? Could you say, well, actually, they do more harm than good, and publish that and have that view as an academic today?
Well,
probably not.
Absolutely fascinating stuff. And as always, having gone through the universities myself for 20 years, I've lived this ride. I've seen the hostility. I've seen the intolerance on campus. And I think what we're going to see here is a Labour government coming out in the next few days and weeks saying, well, we are defending free speech on campus. We are defending free expression, but actually, in reality, what they're doing is taking the teeth out of this law and making it almost impossible to reinforce. So, Eric Kaufmann, thank you for coming on State of the Nation with me, Matt Goodwin, tonight.